Hello and welcome to the Strong by Design podcast show. Hosting today, Coach Chris Wilson. So glad to have you with us. It's always an honor to be hosting one of our episodes here. If you're a past listener, you know I'm not the only one hosting. Sometimes we have Jared, sometimes we have Mike. In the past, we've had Brian and Tanya and some just amazing people in their own right who have really done a great job with our guests and creating terrific conversations. And that's what this podcast is all about, is just having a great conversation, as our guests and I were just speaking about before I hit record, that our listeners get to be a part of. And that's, I think, what makes a good podcast, a great podcast, is when it's two people contributing that are really interested in the topic or in each other. And so we're just so happy to have you on the other end of it. If you're a new listener of the podcast, welcome. So wonderful to have you. We have a lot of past podcasts for you to go back and listen to after you finish this one today, hundreds of them. So you are there's no shortage of great content and conversations that touch on just about everything from all things body, mind, and spirit, really. As we say here, our mantra here at Strong by Design is, you are strong by design. You're made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. And that's a choice that we all are given every single day in our lives when we wake up, to live our life strong by design. You're created strong by design, and then you have to then walk that out in your life. So happy to have you. And I'll ask one thing, and I'll mention it again at the end of the episode. If you could figure out in your mind one person who you feel should hear this conversation, someone that you could share this episode with, that would mean a lot to me and our team here, because that's really what helps us reach more listeners, is when our episodes touch you, move you in some way, and you want to share it with a friend or a family member. And so we would just really, really appreciate that. So thank you for that in advance. So our guest today, Mr. Jose Munoz Aycart. I think I did okay with it. I practiced it prior to hitting record, and I wanted to do him justice. So, Jose, thank you so much for being part of our podcast today. You are the co-founder of Wondermed, which is this is a conversation that I have not yet had on the podcast, and it was so interesting to me. We had a great call a few weeks back, getting to know each other and kind of dialing in on what we're going to talk about today. But could you tell our listeners a little bit from your own mouth, kind of what you're doing and what brought you to this point in your life, to what you're doing with your team? Because what you're doing is relatively newer in the world of I guess, fighting anxiety, depression, and so on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for the introduction. And yeah, you did it perfectly. My name is not an easy one to say, so that was great. Before I start, I think that with the conversation that you and I were having prior to recording, I just want to say happy holidays to everybody that is listening. I think that I'm a little bit earlier, but it's always good to be early with these things. It's usually a very hard time of the year that we're entering right now, but it's also the most beautiful one. And I think that the conversation that we're going to be having today, in diving deeper as to the power that people have in both the controlling their mind, their body, their spirit, and ultimately be able to feel better with themselves and with others, it's an effort exercise. And so to be able to give hope to people in making them believe will be the purpose of the call today, hopefully. And yeah, there's no better time of the year to actually reflect upon what has happened and what you want to happen next.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt about that. I just because when this does release now, because this is obviously preemptive, right, prior to the end of 2022. This will release very early in 2023, but still relevant. So we can say Happy New Year. We can even say Happy New Year right now.
Happy New Year. This is amazing, actually. I'm giving everything for people. Happy New Year's as well. That's right. That's fantastic. Well, let's see how to start. Myself, Jose, a lot of the times gets mentioned as the co-founder of Wondermed, which is the company that we're currently working on. itself, Wondermed is an effort that we're having right now as a conglomerate to try to empower the inner healer of individuals. Our goal is to provide affordable, personalized, and evidence-based care for mental health through the power of psychedelic medicine. The background for where I come from, to give a little bit of space for people to understand who they're going to be listening to today. My background comes from the angle of astrophysics, the study of the universe, the study of reality from an objective science standpoint. And originally myself, I'm from Spain. That's where I grew up. That's where I got most of my values. And at the same time, being able to have been moving around the world and be able to experience different religions, different societies, different traditions. I like to think of myself as somebody that tries to objectively look at the beautiful aspects of life in different areas and how we can bring that back to people. And so, to put in other words, before this, my effort has always been in trying to understand ways in which we can make society better. The aspect of positive impact through efficiencies, understanding that people are the most valuable thing that is out there in the world, that when you put people together, there is an inherent additional value, this energy that gets elevated, that we try to capture and be able to give back to people. And right now we're doing so through the power of psychedelic medicine by allowing people to treat their mental health, such as anxiety and depression disorders, through telemedicine, where they're able to receive at their home a ketamine kit.
Yeah, and this is an area of wellness, if you want to go really broad, or the umbrella term, right, for healthcare or wellness or well-being, that I'm very, I don't know, ignorant to or naive. This is not an area that I know much about, as we have discussed previously. Now, I'm fully aware, though, of the impact on our society, our culture today here in the United States with anxiety and depression and stress and all of these things being what seems at an all-time high. I think if you asked people who just kind of on the street walking by, or if you asked people in the fitness and health space, they would say that it does seem like it's at a heightened level from maybe where it was a decade or two ago. And maybe that's also partly because people are more open to sharing or talking about it, or maybe it's more of an acceptable conversation than it ever was before. Could you touch on that maybe a little bit in terms of it being more prevalent maybe in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of both. If I were to ask the listeners, what do they think that controls the body, the spirit, the mind? Most listeners, I think, would go through the route of the mind being this kind of connectum, the point that makes everything be a holistic connection. And for the longest time, the state of your mind has not really been a cause of conversation, to your point. The aspect of mental health is something that has been more prevalent now in conversations, in dinner tables, among understanding how is it that you feel? Besides work, besides your personal life, besides your day-to-day, how is it that your state of mind currently is? Where are you sitting right now with your awareness of your reality? And I think that the difficulty of this conversation that is being more prevalent is that it's incredibly abstract. When a lot of the times we speak to people about the concepts of anxiety or depression, they're very ethereal terms. The anxiety that you, Chris, might be going through at certain times of stress, or the anxiety that I might go through, they might be reflected in very different symptoms. They might actually be showcased in very different ways. And so it's a very hard topic. It's a necessary one to bring up in conversation. But the reality is that it is indeed an ever-growing problem. In this country, 1 in every 4 Americans are suffering from a diagnosable form of mental health disorder. And the truth is that not that many of us seek treatment, not that many of us seek help more than treatment. About 45% of us only do. And the current problem that has been very prevalent, as a lot of people know, I'm sure, is that the healthcare industry, especially in this country, has been opting in to a very form of a specific solution around mental health. Granted, you have aspects such as antidepressants or benzodiazepines that are medicines that have been given to people as a form of solution that unfortunately have not showcased such great results in solving the mental health, the struggle that people are going through. And so what we strive to do at Wondermed, which is kind of the purpose of why we're connected today in this conversation, is just to bring up the notion that mental health is much more than just medicine. It's much more than anxiety, and it's much more than depression. It is the way in which we see life, the way in which we experience it, the way in which we feel about it, and therefore the way that we live it. And so ultimately, any aspect of mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, PTSD, or any other form of diagnosis, it truly gets rooted on the structural idea that in your brain has been encapsulated from your past experiences, from a certain event in time, or just from your own childhood. We were talking about, Chris, the aspect of very different childhoods that happened for very different forms of children around the world. And so everything becomes subjective. The way in which I see life is personal to myself and to me only. The way in which I therefore perceive it is unique to myself. And so what we need to try to do is make people feel comfortable in the aspect of unknown, in the aspect of not knowing exactly what your mental health state is, just knowing that you would like to explore it and try to make it better.
Yeah, no, it's great. I appreciate what you had to say there. You said a lot, and I know I'm like nodding my head, like, yes, I'm in alignment with much of what you said. I have a couple of questions here to hit you with, but just before this conversation, before I entered this building from the event that I was at, we were doing a charity event as a team, as Critical Bench. It's an annual thing that we do. But I was in communication with my wife briefly on the way back to the building here. And she had told me that somebody that she's followed for years, he was a very famous dancer, like hip hop type dancer, and great, terrific, like amazing. He was on a TV show for years, and somebody that she has followed on social media, that he just took his own life. And you don't know why, right? You don't know the reasons behind this, but it does seem like, gosh, it seems like a lot of these young people who seemingly, like just from what she knows of his life, very little, is that he was a happily married man with children. It seemed like he had everything going for him, and yet these people, as you said, you don't know what this background is, like where this person came from. The way they see the world can be very different from the way you see the world, or the way I see the world, or the way we feel inside our own skin. And it hurts me, or makes me feel so sad that there's people like that. Fortunately, personally, I've never had those dark moments or those dark feelings. I've had loss and struggled with with sadness and stuff before, but nothing that felt chronic or like my world was collapsing around me, where I would even consider that as an option. What was it for you that got you interested in helping people with anxiety or depression? Did you personally go through something?
Yes, I mean, I think we all do, one way or another. I think the example that you're given with the suicide example, it's a very large problem that we have in society for the youth, especially young generations. It is the number one root of death in this country. It's an ever-growing problem that is actually increasingly creating a threat for the young populations. And I feel that the problem with it is incredibly abstract, to your point. There's not a one single solution. And so what really brought me into the attention of wanting to help people with anxiety or depression was the fact that I've always wanted to ask myself the questions that didn't really have an answer. Why are we here? What is it to be a human? What is God? What is the universe? I personally come, as I mentioned before, from an astrophysics background, where I studied cosmological events, planetary movements, mathematical relations of galaxies colliding between one another. And the point that I got of contention out of all of that was the simplicity of life here on Earth. The simplicity that I as Jose, had to be able to understand what reality really is. That chaos, that convoluted questions that really don't have an answer, lack of purpose for a lot of people, really could show up to somebody's life in many different ways. if I were to ask the question of why to people, why do you do what you do for a living? Why do you wake up the way that you wake up? Why is it that you have the relationship with the social people that you actually do? You could always get on this constant why. But the reality is that in day-to-day life, you wake up and you focus on your day-to-day. You focus on your dreams, you focus on your small actions, you focus into what you think it's the right step moving forward. But the reality is that there is not a given answer. And so what I'm very passionate in working with mental health is working in education, is working in increasing the awareness for people to have the ability to create new perceptions, for them to have the ability to dive into their own minds, for them to have the ability to explore these concepts that truly don't get to have a strict answer, but that could truly create a stability within the understanding of what life is. And for a lot of people, I think that that is enough. A lot of times you lose hope. A lot of times you lose motivation, you lose productivity, you lose affection, but you also a lot of times gain them. And so this constant relationship between feelings and emotions within the perception of the day-to-day life, it's a very difficult task. And as humans, I would say that it is very difficult to be a human on top of everything that we add on top of ourselves. And so mental health for me, my background with science was a no-brainer. It was, how can we study the brain? How can we study how people can get better? And doing this from the root cause of wanting to make a bigger and more impactful, positive impact in the world.
Wow. It's that type of work, astrophysics and just the study of the universe, right? And what's happening out there? Why are we here? How do we exist? Why do we exist? Who designed it all? You know, all of these big questions, they keep people up at night, right? And there's people that devote their entire lives to this work. And it's really mind-boggling. You know, we here at Critical Bench, we are a business that's operated by mostly Christian men and women, and that's the philosophy that we, you know, that kind of grounds us in all of our philosophy and thinking and belief system and stuff. But realizing that the world is mixed with lots of different religions and beliefs about how we came to be and creation and all of these things, but it's a conversation worth having with other people. And I think it's a conversation that's avoided nowadays that, you know, if you go back maybe a few decades, didn't used to be, but the feelings, it seems like people are so angry or confrontational, and they're not good listeners. I think a lot of us just need to be better listeners and open to what other people have to share and some of these other cultures and things, and learn from each other more. And but I love that you've kind of mixed these two worlds together a little bit, right? Like universe, big stuff like astrophysics, and then like healthcare and like the mind, how the mind works and perceives things. So it's a very interesting marriage there.
It's an even more difficult marriage because there is a third party involved, and that is religion for me. I was raised Catholic. I've being raised under the doctrine and values that Christianity have brought for generations to the region of the world where I was raised, which was the south of Spain. And for me, internally has been this kind of battle, but most importantly, exploration of thoughts among what is religion as a whole, if not an educational realm? What if religion is not, if you think of Jesus, but an educator? The best to ever exist for some, when you think of the angle of what he teaches, what he prays. It is the ultimate realization that religion provides answers for people, answers to questions that don't have strict answers. And it is those questions that you can create those structures, like you were mentioning, Chris, that allow for that balance, that allow for that faith, that allow for that hope into the future. For a lot of people, that is religion. That might be a different religion. That might be sports, that might be a certain point of science that you were mentioning. It's very diverse, but we all need it. And so hopefully what, you know, psychedelic medicine can really do for people, and in this case, ketamine above any other form of medication that has been given for mental health, it is the belief that within your space, within your understanding of the world, incredibly unique to you, you have the potential to have an increased perspective on life. It is almost like an opportunity to be able to dive deeper into your own mind, to dive deeper into the reasons why you feel certain ways about certain things, and be able to adapt it. It's not about changing your structural values or stigmas. It is about evolving them. It is about generating new forms of thought. We forget about this, but when we're kids, that's all we do. When you're a little kid, the neuroplastic window that your brain is in, or the state in which your brain is basically a state of ever increasing learning. You're generating new neurological connections. You're creating new neurological ideas that create thought and emotions. And that is a process that it never ends. However, as humans, we cannot get to forget about it. And we go back to the same concept. In your day-to-day, you get to forget that what you've learned yesterday could be relearned tomorrow, or could be adapted tomorrow. And to some extent, it should. You should never take something for certain at all times and then keep it certain forever. Because when you learned it, at whichever point it was in your life, the moment right before, it wasn't certain. So when it becomes certain, it gets the possibility of it not being certain anymore at a different point in time when you learn something new. And so really when people think of mental health, and a lot of times there is this stigma around talking about how I feel, or whether or not this is the right thing to do, or whether or not I should explore this type of exercise. The answer is yes, explore. Don't let it affect you before you even do it. Have the conversation. A lot of times just a mere conversation with somebody spurs a new idea, spurs a new concept. And that's what we kind of want to provide to people, having the ability to have access to this conversation, to have access to this form of treatment that could be non-medicinal or medicinal. That could be just a simple conversation, or it could be ultimately a transformative experience that can actually change somebody's life for the better.
Do you feel that with the onset of COVID, which affected people globally, right? Do you feel like that was a kind of a point in time where depression, stress, anxiety, these types of mental health issues really kind of hit an all-time high, or at least were kind of a little bit more under the microscope, or more noticeable, or more discussed? Because I feel like I don't even know that this was much of a topic of conversation if you just go back 5 to 10 years. But it does seem like since 2020, this has been more prevalent in or trending news in terms of like mental health, just getting more, more press.
So I love that, because the answer is, I don't know if it was higher or peaked. It was clearly, distinctly different. Meaning, for people, it was basically a shift in perspective. For a lot of us, it was a stop for a second. For some, it was days. For some, it was weeks. For some, it was months, where their whole regular lifestyle that they used to live got stopped right on its feet. And that just basically allowed people to have different thoughts, different ideas, different thinking upon themselves, their mental health, and the space around them. So if anything, the experience of the pandemic was in some form of sort similarly to what a psychedelic experience does to you, in the angle of giving you a perspective, allowing you to be in a space to have a different form of idea towards a similar topic that you had before. And what I think has happened in the effect of the pandemic, as a specific example, is that when people got in that state, they lacked the resources, or they lacked the awareness to understand what is it that they were going through. A lot of people started going through emotional instability within their couples, within marriages. A lot of them were emotional instability around their careers. A lot of people had emotional instability within themselves, within productivity and motivation, within their meaning of life. A lot of them had it upon their feelings of fear that were instilled in people. A lot of people just were basically feeling very different emotional attachments differently. And so, yes, it's definitely an interesting point where society is right now. I don't think that that's going to change. Society is coming right now, and you look at the future, it seems very uncertain. And so the work that we do for people and the work that people do for themselves really should be towards feeling comfortable in that exploration, feeling comfortable in the knowing that nothing is certain, but that we just need to have very clear the reasons why we believe we're here. Why do we exist? But most importantly, what is it that motivates you? What is it that you want to change? What is it that you want to improve upon? What we mentioned at the beginning of the call, that this is a very beautiful time of the year, but also a very hard one, is because it allows us to reflect upon what we have done and what we would like to do moving forward. And as a whole, I think that that's just an ever-going exercise that we should succumb ourselves to improve.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. You've made several of them, but just if I could pause on that one for a moment, because why is it that this time of year that there's a lot of reflection, I think, and there's a lot of desire in people to be more outward thinking, more service oriented, kinder maybe, more loving, better communicators, like lots of things that are all seemingly really good on their at face value, right? But why does it stop there, right? Or why isn't that all 12 months of the year versus just the one time from Thanksgiving to Christmas when everyone seemingly, and I say everyone, I'm generalizing, of course, but the mood, the feelings, the social environments that we put ourselves in oftentimes this time of year include a lot of that, right? A lot of those good feelings and warmth and friendliness and kindness, even though there's that stress attached to the holidays and some people can't wait for it to be over with. But
interestingly enough, suicide rates are at peaks during this time of the year.
They're also, right.
They're also at peaks. And so you bring a great point. And I think that the answer to that is traditions. A lot of the times, whether there is a religious tradition or a societal tradition, these type of times of the year allow people to reflect upon family, to reflect upon those that you care about, to have additional thoughts in your day-to-day upon the presents that you're going to be getting, or the dinner that you're going to be hosting, or the people that you would like to talk to. And that is not an easy thing to do, especially to your point, when it happens only in certain times of the year. And so it's a great reflection that you're making as to why are we not doing it more often? Why are we not wondering upon the things that we did right, things that we did wrong, things that we would like to improve, or caring about others on a more constant basis? And a lot of the times is that lack of tradition. So for example, when people come to us, and we've had now over 900 patients just recently that came, and the biggest changes that they were making were upon them not just taking medicine. It was about them actually making behavioral changes on their day-to-day. It was them realizing that, wow, I can actually look into this aspect of journaling, or this aspect of doing a breathwork exercise, or maybe meditating for 5 minutes. It is the ultimate perception that, hey, maybe getting to my thoughts is not such a bad idea. Maybe I need to feel more comfortable within this type of thinking. And that ultimately is like an exercise to the body, but to the mind.
Yeah. And that's what, so tell me more and tell our listeners more about what exactly psychedelics are doing for an individual and ketamine. Like what's the impact that they're having that maybe, traditional Western medicine, antidepressants and things are not doing for the individual? What's that difference?
There's physical difference, there's a theoretical difference, and there is a structural difference. The structural difference is that for decades now, we've been treating patients with a substance that inhibits their emotion, that creates a constant feeling of lack of emotion. It basically stabilizes the person, but it extracts the essence away from the person. That's the case of antidepressants or benzodiazepines. They had a focus in seeing mental health as a chemical imbalance. The idea, in other words, goes as follows. There is a chemical problem in your brain, and this pill is going to cure it, or it's going to try to help you regulate it. Ultimately, going back to the idea of one solution for all. In mental health, in particular, we know that that is not the case. Psychedelics bring the opportunity to the table to seeing mental health as a structural problem, more than a chemical imbalance. It is the notion that people truly have the potential to heal. People truly have the potential to feel. And instead of inhibiting those emotions, such as emotional pain, we need to work around them. That is why the notion of a psychedelic experience is a change in perspective. It brings this awareness up Now, psychedelics, and this is something very important for all listeners, it's not the solution alone. If you were to do a psychedelic experience and go about your next day, you're going to get some form of experience aspects of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to heal. The actual exercise that psychedelic medicine brings to the table, it is the notion that people need to have intention setting exercises. There needs to be a purposeful intention as to why you're seeking help or why you want to go into an experience of this sort. Once in the experience, psychedelics and very different psychedelics act differently upon the brain. The biggest commonality is the essence that you get within the experience. There is an increased neuroplastic aspect to the brain where you have new neurological connections, new opportunities of thought. Ultimately, it is just yourself thinking in a different state. That ultimate experience allows patients to gain insights, to gain new thoughts, to gain new perspectives. Now, once you gain those new perspectives, you have the opportunity. There is a window that has opened. Now, the change doesn't actually occur if the patient or the person actually doesn't take action on that perspective. And that is where the aspect of integration comes into play. It is the effort of you, after these experiences, be able to integrate the emotions that you have come up with. Maybe realizing that you might need to go and talk to somebody, whether it's a therapist or a friend. Maybe you realize that there is an aspect of your habits that you would like to change. For our patients, that is the true change that is happening. It's not them receiving psychedelic treatment, therefore healing. It is them going through this process of intention setting, psychedelic experience, and then integration that heals. And the ultimate changes are people moving across the country, people choosing to travel, people choosing to spend more time with their kids, people choosing to learn a new language, people choosing to change a little bit the way in which they dress, people changing the fact that now they are open to go to a restaurant when they haven't due to social anxiety, people feeling that they would like to have additional effort to wake up in the mornings and exercise because that's the ultimate goal they feel they would like to achieve to feel better. We're talking about education, we're talking about awareness, and we're talking about opportunity. And that is what not just Wondermed is trying to provide to people, but psychedelics as a whole. It is the ability to people to heal by empowering themselves.
Yeah, I like that. And I love the sentiment of allowing people to feel versus kind of numbing the pain or, and I feel like that's where, as great as Western medicine is for, obviously emergency care and saving lives in that regard, right? It's wonderful, right? What people can do and when people are, near death and how they can save a life. But I feel like where we've gone wrong is where we've tried to solve a lot of these problems, mental health as one of them, with a drug or a pharmaceutical item, pill, that someone's to take now long term that's really just kind of suppressing or numbing or just helping them overcome something by masking it. Kind of like, how does that's not healing in any way, really. I mean, it might be a good short-term solution for someone who's really in a bad place, right?
It has helped a lot of people too. Absolutely.
Right. But not long-term, right? It's like having a deep wound on your leg or your arm and continually just trying to put gauze and Band-Aids on it to help it heal.
That's exactly.
Eventually, you got to get in there and put the stitches in, right? And do the right things for that wound to go away.
To face it, to face emotional pain, to face an experience that has gone through. And a lot of times, this doesn't have to happen by yourself. I think that a very strong aspect of everything that we're mentioning right now, which hopefully is captivating the attention of people listening, is, okay, well, what next? Great. I'm interested. I want to learn more. What is it that I can actually do? How do I take action? And that's, I think, where we come into play. The aspect of Wondermed and people being able to go to a website and learn more about these topics, the aspect of them being able to start a treatment that is actually a transformational experience, ultimately just gives people the opportunity to be able to do this in the most affordable way that we have been able to do it to date. So kind of to explain a little the logistics, because I feel that we're talking about a very thorough topics and I feel it's sometimes hard to grasp how it actually looks like. The process is very simple. if somebody is interested in learning more about how is it that they could dive into their mental health, they feel that this is something that they might have interest in learning more, they could easily go to wondermed.com and go through a process of questions where they're basically going to be talking about the way in which they feel. They provide information about their mental health, and they provide information about their past. Ultimately, they're able for $399, able for a 1-month treatment to be able to see a clinician where you will be able to meet one-on-one with them, understand a little bit deeper the interest or intention setting that you have in treating your mental health, discussing the roots and causes that have made you come to this point. And then if somebody decides to not be eligible, we in our case have a full refund policy, which I feel is something important to note. If you don't end up going through treatment, there is a full refund policy because we want people to try. We want people to seek help if they feel they need it. Ultimately from them, if they actually think that this is something they would like to move forward, it becomes a transformative experience that they control. That's where the aspect of affordability with the $399 compared to $1,200 that they're able to seek somewhere else comes the aspect of personalization. They're going to be able to receive a package in their home that contains a BP monitor if they were to control their heart rate. It contains the ketamine lozenges, which are lozenges almost like caramels that are put in your mouth and sublingually melt for you to be able to go into a 1-hour experience. A lot of people, when they think of what does this psychedelic experience look like, for ketamine is a 1-hour experience where they're able to dive a little bit deeper into their minds in this meditative state. Ketamine in nature is an anesthetic and has been utilized for over the past 50 years in its utilization within the hospital space. And it was rooted as an incredibly effective antidepressive and anxiolytic substance, thanks to the work of people such as Dr. John Crystal out of Yale University. And so for people, really, this becomes 4, on average, experiences that they're able to go for about 1 hour each on the comfort of their home, that they're able to set upon having access to a digital cohort of resources that provides them breath work, meditation, CBT, IFS, interfamily systems, which ultimately is different thought exercises that they're able to put forward to accompany the actual psychedelic experience and insight. And the goal of this, again, is, like you mentioned, to try to go through a really transformative experience that gains them a new perspective. It is not something that they're going to take and they're going to be healed. It is upon people really wanting to take action and have an exploratory experience for their own mental health.
Yeah. That's wow, that's pretty cool. Because I think oftentimes what it is too, sometimes people can't quite put a finger on their hurt, the pain, the healing process that they may be in need of, but they're not sure the cause. Because maybe it happened when they were 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever it was, and they never gave it much consideration or much thought or much processing, or it was just like, or they kind of played it off as that wasn't really a big deal. But I think a lot of times it's just that way, right? It's like people don't want to talk about their stuff. They don't want to process their stuff. It's just whatever. It is what it is. It doesn't matter. I was 11. It wasn't a big thing or whatever it was. But I think we have to be open to those healing moments, and it sounds like that is something that you're offering with this service. Can you let us know of any? Is there a transformation or any testimony that you have from users of your program that you're able to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I will keep names out of the question just for their own personal reason. But we've had quite a diverse aspect of testimonials. And that kind of goes and touch what I mentioned before, that everybody perceives this very differently. We've had people, for example, as I mentioned before, changing their habits to improve their health overall. We've had people changing the way in which they behave with those that they love, realizing that they might have to change their affection exercises with them and how they tell them that they love them. Very simple changes. In some other aspects of social anxiety, people have been able to improve much more the way in which they feel in big groups of people, or being able to go outside and enjoy time around others. For other people, it has been the potential for them to understand that they can. That has been the biggest commonality. And I hope that that's what people get from this. You